is building a data-driven culture. And so the prompt is alignment around SaaS metrics is an organization-wide mandate. What changes have you made or recommend be made to how teams and systems are aligned and incentivized? So Mike, if I can ask you to kick it off.
Yeah, thanks, Chandler. So I think a big question, we had to ask ourselves, and the big question you have to ask yourselves is, how do we structure our intelligence team? Is it a decentralized approach where you've got various analysts throughout the company within their respective functions, like a product team or finance or sales? Or do you centralize it all together and you have just a one intelligence team for the entire company? We started off with a more decentralized approach. It worked out well in the very beginning, and about a year and a half ago, we moved to more of a centralized approach. Some advantages of that centralized approach are you're going to have everybody speaking the same language because everything is going to be disseminated from one team. Everybody can speak the same language on metrics. I think that's very important when we all refer to some type of metric, and there's tons of them that are out there. Say we're saying annual recurring revenue, we want to make sure we're all calculating it and speaking the same language on it. Having a centralized team, I found, is a little easier to do that than decentralized. A bit of a drawback on that is if you start decentralized and go centralized, there's always that, people had it where they can go to their one designated source on this, and they could probably get something really quick. So there's definitely a speed where it gets a little bit slower, but you get better alignment off of it. So that is a big question to answer. And that question, however you answer it today, may change 1 year from now. So I think it's important to keep asking yourself that question. Regardless of what you do, it's very important that whoever's building out the systems is in lockstep with whoever is going in and reporting on metrics. Sometimes it's the same people. At PI, we it's different. So I build the system, but somebody else is going to go in and physically report on our metrics. It's very important for me as an architect to make sure that I'm building the system for solutions in a way that the intelligence team can get the data out of it. It doesn't do any good if I go and build something and it's the snazziest solution on the face of the planet, but the intelligence team can't get the data that they want out of it. That's not good. On the flip side, if the intelligence team is sitting there and they need metrics and they're boots on the ground and they hear, oh, this is what we need, this is where we kind of need to go with our annual objectives for metric reporting and everything, we have this gap here, they need to come to us and say, hey, what's the best way for us to capture this information so that we can report on it, because they can only report on what we're tracking. So it's very important for the people doing the analysis and the people that are building the system to be in lockstep every step of the way, because the two teams have to be so tightly joined together that if somebody's failing one way or the other, it's not going to be good, and it could reflect poorly on both teams. I know when I go through and scope out any larger projects, I always include the intelligence team very early on, and making sure that what I'm designing makes sense for their purpose. So I think it's very important to be close together.
Any thoughts, guys?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, totally agree with everything Michael said. I think, having a data-driven culture, kind of comes from two ways. Top down, really, you really have to have CEO executive buy-in, that when we have conversations and strategic operational, team meetings, that we're using data in our conversations on a regular basis, right? And we're going to hold people accountable to that top down. On the other side, from a bottoms up perspective on the execution, org design is really important. I think you have to define clear ownership on producing and driving these metrics. Having a whole bunch of people spend a part of their time on it is usually a tough recipe for execution. And so you need to assign an ownership on it. And if you're at the individual, the team, or the department, the way that we've tried to do it in an efficient manner is that the metrics roll up. So the metrics at the team level, the most important of those roll up to the department level. The most of those roll up to the company level, which rolls into the board level. And you can use those metrics in each of those meetings, and they just roll up, and as they get discussed, the conversation gets more refined as they go up. And by the time you get to the board, we've talked about this a bunch internally, and they build off of one another, and you start a regular cadence that this is how we're going to measure the business and that kind of stuff. And it gets built into the just workings of the business. We have a centralized business ops unit at RainFocus with someone in each of the departments that are working with those departments to produce these metrics, to drive metrics back into the conversation. So there's, ownership. They get measured on how well they're serving their internal customer. And then those metrics roll up through the different meetings. And that combination of bottoms up approach and ownership with top down support on that has been a good way that I found to drive towards a data-driven culture.
And Kory, can I ask, did you start with separate silos, an ops person on the sales, ops person in marketing, ops person or other, or did you start with that centralized approach? I know a lot of companies that we work with, it seems to be almost like whack-a-mole, separate ops roles cropping up, and it takes a while to bring that in as a centralized strategic unit. Yeah. Seems like you guys might have done that pretty early.
Yeah, in particular here at RainFocus, we started in the beginning with that model, and it does make it a lot easier to do it. In my previous company, it was siloed, and then we aggregated it to a central function, which it was tough, but we also had top-down support to do that. And so but I've also worked in hybrid models, and you have to, you kind of have to deal with the situation that you're in and figure out what works. Yeah. But I do think that regular, kind of oversight of whether the person that's owning those metrics is on the centralized ops team or whether they're on that department, that centralized communication and working relationship cross-functionally to understand how the systems are being applied to different departments, what metrics are being looked at in each of those, needs to be, in sync and aligned. And so in the cases where the person has reported, not to me and not to a centralized business unit, we have regular meetings and we talk about the data, and we use those conversations to go educate the department head, try to make them look good in the meetings and build a partnership of trust with them. So, the actual the org reporting, will fluctuate, but the approach needs to be consistent in that you really focus on that effort and alignment. You prep going in, you partner with that department and the department head to support them and what they need and show value that way. So
in the report and dashboard trainings that I've done for years, I've said, go in with the expectation when you're building out reporting that you be able to sit in one of these meetings, whether it's a leadership team meeting, and watch your reports and dashboards being used, right? Because you'll learn so much, and it feels like you've built it that way just by that tight alignment between the teams.
Yeah, totally. Having the person that's producing the data sit in there, and it just drives a deeper level of understanding, a deep level of accountability. Yeah, it's really powerful.
I did a webinar with the Einstein team of Salesforce the other week, and it's so interesting that this technology's evolved tremendously, right? So just getting in the realm of predictive, even beyond just being able to put analytics together, but to be able to do some interesting things. But it really still relies on us having sound process that's repeatable, healthy data that we're paying attention to, for the AI stuff to really get interesting.
And the healthy data is a big component of it too, because if you're just putting garbage in, you're going to get garbage out. So I think something we had done a couple of years ago was really craft a data retention policy and data cleanup policy. So processes that we would do on a regular basis to sit there and say, okay, these are gaps within our data. How do we sit there and clean it and fix it? How do we purge bad data out of the system? And whatever we need to do at that point to make sure that the data that we're feeding into the intelligence team to be able to report out on is actually good data. If you're not keeping it clean and it also helps to keep it clean at the outset, but we know that data is going to degrade quickly over time. So anything we can do to try and sit there and stop that and make sure it stays valuable is really important.
One of the things that we've talked about in the RevOps roundtables that I host each month is this idea of a confidence level in the metrics. And I think as an interesting exercise, we can, while sitting in a meeting, leveraging some piece of data, just take a moment and say, how good do you feel about this particular metric? And it's interesting, that idea of going around the room. There's sort of an assumption that since it's a metric on a dashboard that somebody put together, that we all feel like it's 100% valuable. But you wonder, if it's really an 80% confidence level, can we really run the business with that? Is that good enough? And that might be another way to drive that conversation toward what do we need to do to tighten this up.